The dock was empty. No goodbye, no explanation, no final look from the son she had prayed for all her life. Monica stood at the edge of the water, staring into the distance as the ship carrying Augustine disappeared toward Rome. To everyone else, he was a brilliant young man, chasing his future. But to his mother, he was a restless soul moving farther from the God she trusted. And that night, while the world praised his ambition, Monica cried where no one could see her. But what if those tears were not wasted? What if the prayer everyone dismissed as weakness became part of sacred history? And what if God's answer did not come by stopping the ship, but by stopping the wandering? The dock was empty, but Monica kept staring at the water as if the sea itself owed her an answer. The morning light had barely touched the harbor, and the ropes still smelled of salt and damp wood. A ship had left before she could speak, before she could ask, before she could look into her son's eyes and hear the truth. Somewhere beyond that gray line of water, Augustine was sailing toward Rome, toward ambition, toward a future he believed he needed. And Monica, his mother, stood behind with the kind of silence that makes even prayer feel wounded. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. According to Augustine's own later memory and confessions, his departure was not simply a journey. It was a wound. He remembered deceiving his mother, allowing her to remain behind while he escaped across the sea. We should be careful not to imagine every detail as if a camera recorded it. The historical record is limited, and Augustine wrote as a man looking back through repentance, prayer, and grace. But what Christian memory preserved is powerful. A mother loved him enough to follow, and he was restless enough to leave without giving her the dignity of the truth. At that shore, Monica lost more than access to her son. She lost the right to be answered. She lost the ordinary comfort of a farewell. She lost the small mercy of honesty. The first offense was not loud. No soldier dragged her away. No judge condemned her. No crowd mocked her in the street. But the humiliation was visible. A mother standing alone where a son should have spoken. Perhaps someone nearby thought, "He is grown now." Perhaps another person looked away because grief is uncomfortable when it cannot be fixed. But Monica's pain was not simple attachment. She was not merely afraid of distance. She feared that the son she loved was drifting toward a life where brilliance could be mistaken for wisdom, and applause could drown out the voice of God. The sea did not answer her. The ship did not return. And in that moment, her prayer may have felt like it had fallen into the water. But this story is not about a mother who was proven right in the cheap way people love to tell stories. It is not about revenge. It is not about humiliating Augustine. It is about a hidden sorrow God did not ignore. For a long time, Monica would look like the one left behind. But one day, the son who ran from her tears would preserve them. To understand Monica's wound, we have to understand how easy it is to misread a praying mother. To some, she may have looked excessive, too emotional, too worried, too bound to a son who was old enough to make his own choices. Augustine had gifts people could admire. He had a sharp mind, a hunger for language, a talent for persuasion, and the kind of ambition that made others believe he was meant for more. In a world where public honor often belonged to men who could argue, teach, and rise, Augustine looked like promise. Monica looked like interruption. She was the voice asking what success would cost his soul. She was the mother whose concern could be dismissed with a polite smile. She was the woman whose prayers had no official seat in the rooms where Augustine's future was discussed. No one had to mock her openly for the wound to deepen. Sometimes the cruelest dismissal is gentle. A changed subject, a tired expression, a look that says, "This is only a mother's fear." But Monica's tears were not weakness. They were the labor of faith when every visible door had closed. She did not pray because she wanted to own Augustine's future. She prayed because she knew there are places a mother's voice cannot enter. She could not follow him into every conversation, every temptation, every private argument of the mind. She could not stand beside him in every city, every classroom, every restless night. So she did what hidden saints have always done when love reaches the edge of its power. She entrusted him to God. Still, that kind of prayer can feel humiliating. It gives no public proof. It does not make a person look strong. It does not command attention. Monica could not point to immediate results and say, "See, God is answering. In fact, much of what she saw seemed to say the opposite. The more she prayed, the farther Augustine seemed to go. And Augustine, for his part, was not a monster. That matters. He was not a cartoon villain rejecting his mother for pleasure. He was a restless soul. He wanted truth, but he also wanted admiration. He wanted freedom, but he did not yet understand that freedom without God can become another form of captivity. He wanted to become himself, but he did not yet know that the self he was chasing would remain divided until grace found him. To Augustine, his mother's grief may have felt like pressure. To Monica, his distance felt like spiritual danger. This was the heart of their conflict. The same love that made Monica pray made Augustine want to run. And in the silence between them, God was watching both. Augustine moved toward the world of words. He was drawn to rhetoric, argument, beauty, persuasion, and the promise that a gifted mind could rise above ordinary life. In historical terms, Augustine's path took him through study, teaching, religious searching, and eventually to Rome and Milan. But for a sacred documentary, the deeper movement is not just geographical, it is spiritual. He was not simply moving from one city to another. He was moving through false lights, trying to find one bright enough to quiet his heart. The tragedy was not that Augustine was intelligent. The tragedy was that intelligence had not yet become wisdom. Picture him in a room full of voices, young men debating, teachers praised, ideas sharpened like blades, scrolls open, lamps burning late, words rising and falling. In that world, a man could become known. A man could win arguments. A man could feel, for a moment, that he had conquered uncertainty. But when the room emptied, what remained? That is the question Augustine's life kept asking him. What remains after applause? What remains after cleverness? What remains after the crowd believes you are impressive, but your own soul still feels scattered? Monica's world looked smaller from the outside. A lamp, a prayer, a mother awake when others slept. But her small room held a kind of truth Augustine's larger world had not yet given him. She prayed not because she understood every idea he encountered, but because she understood the ache behind them. She knew her son was searching. She also knew searching can become a maze when pride refuses to kneel. In this part of the story, we must resist making faith the enemy of thought. Augustine's later life would become proof that Christianity does not fear the mind. He would become one of the most influential thinkers in Christian history. The problem was not learning. The problem was a heart trying to use learning to escape surrender. And Monica could see enough to be afraid. Imagine the contrast. Augustine awake beneath a lamp of ambition, Monica awake beneath a lamp of prayer. Both sleepless, both reaching, both longing for something, but Augustine reached forward into the world, while Monica reached upward toward God. The distance between them became more than miles. It became a difference in trust. He trusted movement. She trusted mercy. He trusted brilliance. She trusted grace. He trusted the next city, the next idea, the next opportunity. She trusted the God who sees what mothers cannot fix. And yet, from Monica's side, it must have looked as if trust had failed her. The son she prayed for did not come closer. He moved farther into the very world that seemed to celebrate his distance from her. That is where many faithful people break. Not when God says no clearly, but when life seems to move in the opposite direction of prayer. Monica had prayed for God to hold Augustine near. The ship sailed anyway. There are prayers that feel unanswered because nothing changes. Then, there are prayers that feel unanswered because everything gets worse. For Monica, Augustine's journey must have carried that second kind of pain. She had prayed, she had wept, she had followed as far as she could, yet the son she loved crossed the sea, entered new circles, pursued new ambitions, and became even harder to reach. If the shore was the wound, the years after it were the ache that would not close. What does faith do when the visible evidence argues against it? That is one of the most sacred questions in Monica's story. It is easy to honor her now, after centuries have softened the pain into a testimony. But before the testimony, there was waiting. Before the memory, there were nights. Before Augustine wrote about grace, there was a mother wondering whether her tears had meant anything at all. Maybe she remembered him as a child. Maybe she remembered his voice before pride learned to defend itself. Maybe she asked God if she had loved him poorly, prayed wrongly, held too tightly, spoken too often, or not spoken enough. These are the questions love asks when it cannot control the outcome. And there is a particular loneliness in praying for someone who does not want the prayer. Monica could not force Augustine into faith. She could not argue him into peace. She could not mother him back into surrender. At some point, every parent, every spouse, every friend who loves a wandering soul comes to the same devastating border. I can love you, but I cannot become your God. That border is holy and heartbreaking. So, Monica kept praying. Not because prayer gave her control, but because prayer gave her somewhere to place the love that had nowhere else to go. For a long time, God's answer did not arrive as thunder. It did not arrive as a sudden miracle on the dock. It did not arrive as a ship turning around. It did not arrive as Augustine running back, ashamed and ready to listen. For a long time, God's answer looked like absence, but hidden inside that absence was a mercy Monica could not yet see. The journey she begged God to stop would become part of the road God used. Augustine would go where Monica feared him going. He would taste the restlessness she feared. He would discover that admiration could not heal him. He would learn that ideas, however beautiful, could not save him by themselves. This does not make the pain easy. It does not make the deception good. It does not mean every wound was secretly harmless. Christian faith does not require us to pretend pain is not pain, but it does teach something deeper. God is not limited to the path we begged him to choose. Monica may have asked God to stop the ship. God was preparing to stop the wandering, and that is the hidden turn of this story. The prayer that seemed unanswered was not being thrown away. It was being carried into a future no one at the dock could yet imagine. Augustine kept moving, but movement did not give him rest. That is one of the great truths his life would later confess. The human heart can travel far and still remain homeless. He had sought truth in ideas, identity in achievement, and freedom in distance, but something in him remained unsettled. Every answer opened another question. Every success faded into another hunger. And somewhere in that hunger, Monica's prayers remained, not as chains, not as accusations, not as a mother's attempt to control him. They remained like a lamp in a room he had tried to leave behind. This is where the story must be told carefully. Monica did not save Augustine. God did. The grace of Christ, the witness of Scripture, the influence of Christian teaching, the ache of Augustine's own conscience, and the mysterious work of God all belong to the story. Monica was not the author of his conversion, but she was a witness God did not erase. There comes a time when the truths we once resisted return with a different voice. Augustine may once have heard his mother's faith as pressure. Later, he could begin to see it as mercy. What felt like restriction when he was running could be recognized as love when he was tired. That is one of grace's quiet miracles. It does not only forgive the sinner, it teaches the sinner how to remember. Augustine began to see his life differently. The past was no longer a collection of escapes and achievements. It became a confession, a trail of mercy, a record of being pursued when he thought he was the one doing the searching. And in that record, Monica's tears had a place. Think of the moral reversal. At the dock, Monica seemed powerless. In the world of ambition, her prayers seemed small. In the rooms where Augustine's mind was praised, her grief had no official authority. But years later, when Augustine looked back and tried to tell the truth about his life before God, he could not tell it without her. The mother once dismissed as emotional became part of the sacred memory. The woman left behind at the shore entered the written testimony of the son who had left her. That is not revenge. That is restoration. Revenge would have made Augustine ashamed and Monica triumphant. Grace made Augustine truthful and Monica honored. The difference matters, because the deepest answer to Monica's tears was not that Augustine finally admitted, "My mother was right." The deeper answer was that God brought Augustine to a place where he could see his mother rightly, not as an obstacle, not as a burden, not as the voice he had to escape in order to become free, but as a witness, a lamp, a woman whose love had suffered because she believed his soul was worth more than his success. He once escaped her tears. One day, he would preserve them. The story that began at the shore finds its answer near another view of the world beyond them. Not an empty dock this time, a window. In Book 9 of Confessions, Augustine remembers a sacred conversation with Monica at Ostia, near the end of her life. Again, we should speak carefully. We receive this moment through Augustine's prayerful memory, shaped by theology, repentance, and love. But whether every detail can be reconstructed exactly or not, the meaning Christian memory preserved is unmistakable. Mother and son were together, not divided by escape, not separated by deceit, not standing on opposite sides of a ship's departure. Together. The image matters. At the beginning, Monica looked across water alone. At the end, she and Augustine looked beyond the visible world together. The first scene was abandonment. The last was communion. There, the years did not disappear. Grace does not pretend the wound never happened. Augustine had still left. Monica had still cried. The silence had still cost her, but now the wound had been gathered into mercy. Monica did not need to possess Augustine's future. She had seen what she most longed to see. Not worldly success, not fame, not reputation, but the turning of her son toward God. That is why the ending is not loud. It should not feel like victory music. It should feel like evening light, a mother and son near a window. The long argument quieted, the long chase slowed, the restless heart finally beginning to understand the grace that had followed it. The mother who once had no answer at the shore, now standing in a moment where the answer was not a sentence, but a presence. Her son was there. His heart was no longer running in the same way. And later, when Monica was gone, Augustine remembered. That remembering is part of the restoration. Monica did not live to see every chapter of Augustine's influence. She did not live to watch centuries read his words. She did not live to know how many Christians would later speak of her patience, her tears, her prayers, and her faith. But she lived long enough to know the tears were not wasted. And Augustine lived long enough to write in such a way that the world would know it too. The empty shore had taken her dignity for a moment. The written memory gave it back. The secret departure had denied her the truth. The confession restored it. The world that once saw her as only a grieving mother was given a different image. Monica as a faithful witness. A woman whose hidden prayers became part of one of the most remembered conversion stories in Christian history. So what is God's answer to the one who cried alone last night? It may not always come as the ship turning around. It may not come as the apology arriving when you begged for it. It may not come as immediate proof that your love, your prayer, your waiting, and your tears have been understood. Sometimes God's answer comes slowly. Sometimes it comes through memory. Sometimes it comes when the person who misunderstood you finally sees what your love was trying to protect. Sometimes it comes when history itself refuses to forget the prayer everyone else dismissed. Monica's story does not promise that every wandering child returns on our schedule. It does not turn pain into a formula. It does not make prayer a lever by which we control another soul. It gives something more reverent and more honest. It tells us that God sees hidden tears. It tells us that love offered to Him is not wasted, even when it appears powerless. It tells us that a prayer dismissed as weakness may be stronger than the world knows. And it leaves us with one final image, a quiet window at Ostia, a mother and son no longer divided by escape, argument, or shame, speaking of eternity before her story passes into sacred memory. The dock was empty once, but heaven had seen who was standing there. Monica's story reminds us that some of the deepest acts of faith happen where no one applauds. A prayer whispered in the dark may look powerless to the world, but in the hands of God, hidden faith can become part of a much larger story. This is not a lesson about controlling the people we love. Monica could not force Augustine to believe. She could not argue him into peace, and she could not drag him back from the path he chose. Her love reached a painful boundary. She could pray, but she could not become God for her son. That is where many people find themselves. A parent praying for a child, a spouse praying for a marriage, a friend praying for someone lost in pride, addiction, ambition, or confusion. The hardest part of faith is often not believing that God can act it, is trusting Him when His answer does not look like the answer we begged for. Monica wanted the ship stopped. God was working on the wandering heart. Her tears were not weakness. They were spiritual labor. They were love surrendered to God when human influence had reached its limit. And years later, Augustine's own memory would honor what he once misunderstood. The message is not that every story ends quickly or neatly. It does not. Some prayers take years, some wounds remain tender. But Monica's story tells us something sacred. God sees what people dismiss. He hears the prayers that never become public. And sometimes, what looks like delay is not abandonment. It is mercy working beyond what we can see. If Monica's story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who has been praying in silence. There may be someone in your life who needs to remember that hidden tears are not forgotten by God. And before you leave, subscribe for more sacred stories from Christian history, the Bible, the early church, and the lives of faithful people whose quiet courage still speaks today. Now I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever prayed for someone for so long that you started wondering if God still heard you? Maybe it was a child, a parent, a spouse, a friend, or even yourself. Did the answer come quickly, or did it come through years of waiting, silence, and surrender? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may encourage someone else who is still standing at their own empty shore, wondering if God sees them. In the next video, we'll explore another sacred story of faith, pain, and restoration, a forgotten witness whose silence became testimony.